All right. So my name is Brian Lambert. I'm going to talk a little bit about running sales enablement as a business within a business. And we're actually at Emory today, so hopefully everybody's in the right class. I cracked myself up. But I was one of the original founders of the Sales Enablement Society. I've also been in sales enablement. I've actually stood up 5 sales enablement functions. One of those was at ATD, where I launched the first community of practice and sales training, which then became the sales enablement view of ATD, which then that became ATD Sell. So I had started that. Then I actually worked with Scott Santucci at Forrester when we launched the sales enablement role at Forrester Research. And then I went into GP Strategies, which is the world's largest publicly traded training organization. And I stood up the sales enablement function there as a consulting organization to our clients. And then I went into a Fortune 50 company, led a transformation. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is give you a bit of a case study view of what we did to transform from a traditional learning function into an enablement function. And then I'll give you guys some of the models that we used, as well as some of the organizing thoughts that we had to help us be successful over what was really a 4-year transformation. I'm also the host of the Inside Sales Enablement podcast. So that's right, thanks. And if you are listening to that, it's at insidese.com, and hopefully you can listen to that and become one of the Insider Nation members. And we'll be at the society meeting in October, where we'll actually be doing some of the recording and stuff. So hopefully we'll see you out there. So without further ado, I was a paper boy back in the day. And for those of you that don't know, they would actually give teenagers newspapers, and what we had to do was ride our bikes around and actually deliver this. Believe it or not, there was this thing called a newspaper, and it was printed out. And you had to throw it in people's yards. That was how our news was delivered back in the day. Now, I'm not super old. I'm old to a lot of people. I was in San Francisco at the Sales Enablement Summit giving this talk, and I think I was the elder statesman, and I'm not even 50 yet in sales enablement, so that was interesting. But and it was great to talk to them about their starting up of their role and et cetera, and they're really excited and passionate about being in sales enablement. But I'm not that old, and this view that you're looking at is not that long ago technically. It's not even a lifetime. It's not even half of a lifetime. But if you look at what's happened in that field of media, there's been quite a transformation. And everybody knows that we're in a transformation right now. And I can spend a lot of time around my research on transformation of economies and transformation of industrial age to information age, the digital transformation, all these things, new business models, et cetera. But really what I want you to zero in on here is look at the transformation of a simple interaction or a simple relationship that we have with news and how radically transformational it's become. Whereas today it's actually customer generated. It's actually, a lot of our news is actually coming from crowdsourced folks actually with their live streaming, and they're videoing police, they're videoing unfortunately mass shootings, things like that. It's real time and it's basically uncurated. And customers drive then a lot of expectations in that view, and it's happening in every single industry. Raise your hand if you are in a transforming industry right now. So everybody's in that. So my first activity, if you're online, I want you to chat in the chat box, and I'm going to put us on mute in the room, and we're going to have little breakouts for 2 minutes. But I'm going to ask you, what are you enabling? Online, chat in the box, just what are you enabling? Just answer it, no right or wrong answers. And I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to discuss. So what are you enabling? All right, now we're back. So in the room, we talked about enabling performance, enabling sales, enabling growth, and then we got into a discussion around who are we enabling. Are we enabling salespeople, sales managers, executives? What else? What else do we talk about? Did I summarize that well, anybody?
Communities of enablement.
Communities. Okay. And I shared with you guys online what they typed, so thanks to you for your online participation. What I want to do now is take those answers and we're going to plot those out here. Again, there's no right or wrong, but first of all, I'm going to start with customer expectations, and I'm going to give us a way to think about this before we start pegging our answers in. First of all, customer expectations are evolving. I already talked about that. But those customer expectations require and ask us internally in our organizations to say, hey, we should be better at selling. We should do better marketing. We should have more innovation, or better leadership. These are things that people then go act on. And what happens is oftentimes we're organized by functional groups who says because we need to sell more, that's sales, or because we need to market more, that's marketing, or because we need better leadership, that's leader dev. And it ends up being a siloed view of that. But what happens if customer expectations don't necessarily map to silos? Customers actually don't even care how you're organized. They don't care about your org chart. They don't care about what offices you have and where they're at, unless they're in retail. And those customer expectations can drive a lot of friction. Those silos are important to think about, and now we're starting to get into the view of sales enablement. And for us in the room, when we look at how people are going about breaking down those silos and how they're going about their work, when Scott and I talk about it on our podcast, we try to help group things out because there are domains of sales enablement that are beginning to crop up. First is there's a sales administration view. This is like sales support, contracts, etc. So this is a view of sales enablement because it can help break down silos and friction, especially around back office processes, where a lot of sales enablement folks have, or salespeople have struggles with quotes, for example, with getting deals out the door, proposals. That can create friction and slow down. Sometimes the sales administration view ends up being sales prevention, it seems. We also talk in our podcast about the messaging side, so marketing's role in getting the message right about product, et cetera, but from a brand perspective, but also a value proposition perspective, and what the value is of the product. That can create a bunch of silos, friction as well, because not everybody has the same aligned view of what the product is or what the value of it is. Third area of friction is around demand generation and what is a good lead, how do we get leads, what should we be saying to get leads. Gartner's publishing research that says 70% of all decisions are made, or 60% of all of the decision making is done before they ever talk to a salesperson. That's only about transactional deals, but a transactional pattern, that's important to understand. But in a consultative one, nobody's going to buy a data center that way online, especially if they're international or whatever, and it's a lot of moving parts. So how do we generate demand? Is it thought leadership? Is it campaigns, et cetera? That can create friction. And then sales talent development. Right now in sales enablement, when you look at it, there are a lot, I'd say 80% of the folks in sales talent development. So when I was at the summit, Sales Enablement Summit in San Francisco giving this talk, we actually did a survey, and I said, who's in sales administration? I think there were 2 or 3. Who's in demand gen? There was 10 or so out of 250 people. Who's in sales messaging? That was actually a pretty good group. I'd say 25, 30, 10%. But the bulk of the audience was in sales talent development. And I wanted to call this out because I think we have to be a little bit careful about sales enablement's promise of what executives are expecting versus what they're getting. If we just relabel, quote unquote, just relabel training into enablement and say, well, we're enabling sellers, really it's just we're training sellers, then just say you're a trainer. And you train, why change the word to enabling? If you are coaching and you're in the coaching side and if you're going around and saying I'm an enablement expert and what you do all day long is you help coach reps, just say you're a sales coach. There's a lot of confusion, I think, going on with executives around what is the promise of sales enablement, which to an executive is to increase the yield of the sales force, versus what folks are talking about, which is coming across in many ways to executives as renamed sales trainers. They have a bit of a false perception of the value. So this is, if you pattern this out, what would become the sales conscious support. So what is sales enablement? This is talked about with Scott. He published this, Scott Santucci, who many consider the father of sales enablement. He put it into 4 domains. You have sales talent development, which is hiring, onboarding, training, and readiness, usually training, L&D roles, and there's sometimes friction between HR and sales and how they view it. HR would have more of a general view. Sales L&D or sales talent dev would have a more sales-focused view. On the messaging side, you've got content marketing, buyer journeys, personas, et cetera, account-based marketers, writers, analysts, managers, and there's oftentimes, you hear it all the time, marketing and sales friction. Demand gen, leads, appointments, opportunity scoring. SDR is huge right now. Obviously, you might actually be in that business, but the amount of SDR volume to buyers is unheard. It's hard to picture. I was at a buying role for 2 years. I just got pounded. I probably had 100 calls a week as a senior director, and there's just a lot of volume with demand gen, and that creates some friction with marketing and sales and HR, what they're saying, what's the sales motion, how do you hand off between SDRs and account executives, et cetera. And then sales administration. And I talked a little bit about this, but there's so much risk aversion in the buying process today that buyers are constantly bringing procurement in, legal in, coming up with new requirements, et cetera. Who's helping salespeople navigate, and then who's removing the complexity from inside their organization to speed up the quoting process, for example, where it could take a week to get a quote out and you've lost the competition. It happens all the time because of internal complexity. So this is how Scott views it, him framing out what I just did. So let me go back online. If you guys are in your comments field, what are you guys specifically working on? And we'll do this 2 minutes in the room as well. We talked about what are you enabling, but now specifically, what are you working on? And I'd like to get projects, a portfolio of projects, name them in the chat. Be as specific as possible. I do playbooks, whatever. Talk about what that is in the chat, and then in the room, let's do that as well. What are you working on? Okay, go. I'm going to go back a slide because they're asking for that in the room. And then just so we'll give you another 30 seconds, but let me read off some of these. And I was in the afternoon slot, and then I'll give you guys another 30 seconds, but I was in the afternoon slot at San Francisco. So I don't know how many presentations beforehand. It actually sounded like this list. Here's the list from what was in the room plus online: onboarding, playbooks, messaging, sales kickoff, sales manager training, demand gen, lead gen, sales interactions, compensation, analytics, demand gen, content marketing, events, and then like role definition. So that's what we have for a list. So I'm back now. Okay. So let's go one at a time since I'm unmuted. What were you going to say?
Oh, I just wanted to refer back to this because I think that I'm not covering everything that everyone's mentioned, but I was within those buckets. Obviously, me and what I'm dealing with, and then just scaling and growth strategy for where training's related within companies. Yeah, I don't get as much into the sales messaging, demand, or sales administration side of things.
Gotcha. So on this one, let's filter this, right? So we did a kind of a first shake of what domain might you be in and what sandbox you're playing in. And lucky for somebody in the room, they were playing in all of them. Mm-hmm. So what I want to do now is look at the lens that you used. And this comes from, again, the work that Scott's been doing. But, did you talk in the language of building and delivering, actually creating? So you build, I build, I'm doing this, I'm building that, I'm launching, I'm creating. Or did you talk about in terms of programs? So I run onboarding. Sometimes people say I own whatever. Sometimes playbooks is all they do, and that's their program, is the playbook program. Others are in the portal. They run the enablement platform. That's a program. Sometimes they talk in that. And then others talk in San Francisco. There were four or five that talk in the language of, I'm trying to work with the go-to-market. We're in our annual budgeting process right now. I'm trying to get more headcount from marketing. I'm trying to get investments in our overall platform. They're talking in terms of a business unit. Online, where do you guys put yourselves? Just put in there, are you building and delivering? Are you running programs or leading a business unit? And then a show of hands in the room, who would be build and deliver? Okay, who would be run programs? And then who would be lead a business unit? We got a couple of hands around the business unit. Most are on the build and deliver side, and then maybe one or two on programs. Now this is an interesting thing because sales enablement is new, and you would this should not be surprising, so there's no value judgment here. The profession itself is new, and everybody's in startup mode. That's one way to look at it. There are others. Oh, and I forgot the online. Let me see. Online is run programs. Gotcha. Most of them are run programs with one around the build and deliver. Okay. And then there are a couple people who come in and they take over a program that's a little bit already up and running, and they take it to the next level. And some that we talk to are actually in this idea of the business unit piece. So I'm going to talk about and make a bit of a shift and say, okay, what's common in all these conversations? And this is important because sales enablement, as it continues to grow, we're going to have some points of view. So what I'll do here is outline that no matter what, everybody has to generate demand for their program, their solution, or their business unit. They have to generate demand. So that should be common across all of you guys. You should be able to and have to position your function, your role, your department. You should get funding for it, before you have it funded, and you should understand where you stand around that funding. And then you have to operate your function or your role. So what that means is if you're generating demand, you have to position your value. If you're going to position that value, you have to communicate the value. When you communicate value, you have to manage stakeholders, and then you have to be able to quantify or at least be able to explain how you deliver value and outcomes. And the key, I think, in the role is we have to make some shifts, and I call them from what to what. We have to move from doing to sales to doing with sales. And this is important because last week I was in that conference. Did you guys know on the 4th floor was sales enablement? Guess who was on the 5th floor? Hosted by the exact same conference host, 2 separate floors. Guess who was on the 5th floor? Oh, you were there. Product marketing on the 5th floor. So I want you guys to pretend, I want you to go with me. Look at this. We're in a conference, sales enablement, 250 people, double the amount on the floor up of the product marketing. In other words, double the amount of people who want to shove things into sales, while the sales enablement people are all downstairs trying to figure out how to structure this stuff up and keep it from happening. The only time they talked was at a networking mixer, because they had shared networking, but everybody stayed in their silo and their comfort zones. And they'd go back to their escalators and go back to their content because it's for their silo. And I'm like, this is what's wrong, people. And oh, by the way, where's the sales managers and all this?
Not invited.
They're not invited, and or they're at the office, they're on the phone, working, closing deals, pay for all this stuff, because everybody's got their expense accounts coming next week. So sales managers aren't even in there. And they're not going to feel comfortable going to that stuff because half of it is, or maybe even more, is irrelevant to them.
Right.
What is everybody doing? So this is the challenge. That is the challenge. So move from doing to sales to doing with sales. And if you're not talking to salespeople and managers and actually having their backing, that's a problem. You have to move from doing stuff down only with your team to doing stuff up, down, and across. Instead of just finding a few relationships, you have to do it all relationships, many or all. And you got to get outside your comfort zone there and even talk to people you don't consider happy or you don't consider like you, or perhaps they even annoy you. You have to learn how to work with these folks. And then you got to move from deliverables to outcomes. And when you do that, you can elevate your role and evolve your role. So that's key. So what Scott did over the last, 8 years or so, and him and I would talk about it, but we would talk about how do we break this stuff down. And I'm going to walk you through this, and I'm going to tell you how I used it. So now we're going to go into an application piece. What I just shared with you is where things sit, how it all frames up, and what the challenges are in our silos. Now I'll say, what's the upside? What's the value of the function? And the functional value of sales enablement is supposed to be the other side of the go-to-market strategy. We're going to market, now we have to enable the sales team. And if we're just doing that in a silo, that's a challenge because the sales team requires cross-functional support. So where's the strategic function that owns the business process behind sales conversations? That's sales enablement. And that means content, skills, tools, all that has to be aligned to simplify around the customer conversation. So how would you do that? All businesses, from a lemonade stand to my paper route, have a vision and a mission. Mine was a paper route, I wanted a new bike. That was it. The lemonade stand, And even in and I would even say your business that you're working in. But the question I would have for you is, what's your vision and mission for your sales enablement business? And what if you ran it as a business within a business? What would it be? Then all companies maximize shareholder value. And my shareholders, and my paper route was my mom and dad, because they invested in my first bike. They wanted me to take care of it, et cetera, wanted me to pay it off. Luckily, they didn't charge me interest. But shareholders today charge interest. So who are the shareholders in your organization, but more importantly, who are the shareholders in your sales enablement business? You have a core competency, those are the domains, right? So that's fine. If you're in a domain, own it, but be sure you're clearly defining that and also the value of it. And then think about the functional staffing of your business. Who is your board of directors? How do you operate your business within a business? How do you market your business within a business? How do you sell to generate demand? How do you finance it? What about R&D? Do you have any special projects? Are you testing new things? A Skunk Works project to test out and add different kind of value? How do you produce deliverables and distribute those deliverables? And when you shake it out, what that means is pretty specifically, who's buying your stuff? Are you just peddling watches and deliverables? Hey, I got something to sell you. Or are you selling to executives? And much like the sales team that you're supporting, you may have to learn how to sell to executives too. You may have to learn how to position yourself. So who's buying, and then what are they buying? Are they buying deliverables? Are they buying services? Are they buying outcomes? What is it? These are fundamental business questions. So to help with that, think about your business as Business Within a Business Inc., Sales Enablement Inc., and map it out. Take a screenshot of this. How do you run your operation? How do you produce what you produce? What's the process? How do you distribute what you produce? A lot of this is knowledge work, obviously. How do you market yourself, sell and generate demand? How do you get outside of you? If you feel boxed in, how are you going to sell your way out of it? That's what our sales folks need to do. So that's the construct that was pretty empowering for what I needed to do. I was brought in after a merger, to stick three companies together. They were doing that, but then we had basically 7 or 8 different L&D groups that we needed to get into one. And at the same time we were consolidating, there was a new vision to transform into more of an enablement function and work backwards from conversations. So I'll walk you through what that looks like, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A. So for me, to build Enablement Inc., I needed to have a strategy. My strategy was, how do I scale to reach new customers? And the VP I was working with, he wanted to make sure that our Enablement Inc., our function, was productive. So we needed to manage and measure productivity. We also needed to evolve from a bunch of individuals to a strategic function that enabled the go-to-market. I can tell you that evolution actually accelerated. We moved from L&D, and then we ended up with the process team, the quality team, the knowledge management team. We started consolidating functions under this strategic vision. Not just by communicating it, but actually having analytics and all these other things that proved our value. And then we had to manage risk. Who is the competition, so to speak, of our Enablement Inc.? We're going to have staff turnover. How do we manage our own talent? We invested heavily in certifying all our people and having an onboarding for our own people into this Enablement Inc. And then I talked a little bit about the merger piece of other functions. And then what are we selling? Many in L&D in this case, they sell butts and seats, if you will, or training or webinars. We wanted to move into services. So we wanted to sell onboarding services to sales VPs. We wanted to sell new hire training as a service. We wanted to sell product launch services to all the business unit heads. So when you're launching a product, here's our value, here's our role, here's how we engage, here's our deliverables, here's our timelines, here's what we need, here's our dependencies. I go on for another week. So there's a lot of things that we were asking for that moved us into more of a services view, including ongoing development services. So how do we move people to 101, 201, 301? We had assessment services. We actually had role definition services. So now the third piece is consulting. We had business units coming to us saying, hey, can we redefine our roles? They didn't go to HR. They came to us, and we actually did consulting. We also did consulting on their team meetings, their kickoffs, et cetera, and we provided whiteboarding advice, if you will, with an output that said, here are some ideas. And then we started connecting dots across all initiatives, which as a service. And we had analytics and all these things. So this is a 4-year journey. It's about 120 people that were in the enablement function. So obviously this is a pretty big organization to do all this. But the key is not the people count, the head count, so much as the concept of what the concept allowed us to do was to actually pull all these functions in. We actually decreased headcount and did more with less, so to speak, from a business within a business perspective. So that's the power of the business within a business. Going through the roadmap view to evolve and elevate, we looked at how do we build and deliver, how do we run programs, and how do we lead our unit. We had to do all three. We had to get the basics in place, we had to get our team in place, and then we had to have our function. In 2008, I was the peer review on Sales Enablement Defined that Santucci wrote. This is 2019, almost 2020, and I worked at Forrester with Scott in 2008, and Forrester just redefined Sales Enablement 11 years later. Scott tells a story of 1960 whatever, John F. Kennedy says we're going to put a man on the moon in 5 years, and they did it. And in Sales Enablement, in 9 years, all we do is redefine what it is. Where's our man on the moon? And this is a challenge because executives are going to start getting impatient. So that's, if you want to have a seat at the table, if you want to have a function, and I think I would just say in our siloed view, we're way too judgmental of other silos. I tongue-in-cheek say, where's the managers, but who's inviting them? I didn't invite anybody either, right? I could have, I should have. Did I build a bridge to product marketing? A couple of them, but how do I not be so judgmental that their title means we're not going to get along? Things like that. We have to do that. It's like the political atmosphere these days. Yeah. Who's reaching across the aisle here, or are we going to sit in judgment on others? And that's, I think we have to, I know we have to do that. And I'll just say there are two main groups that do it the kind of the worst for judginess is the product marketing side, who passes judgment on everybody about product, and then it's the training side that passes judgment on everybody about that they have it all figured out and everybody just needs to do what they say. That's how it comes across. So there's and if you didn't like what I just said, I came from the training background. I was one of them, and I converted to be less judgmental. At least I hope so. So I had to move from a startup to an optimization phase to transformation phase. Our leadership team, it wasn't just me, I was on the leadership team, and we did these 12 things. So this is basically the roadmap. You have to learn a prioritization process. I could go into each one of these for a day or so, but prioritize, how do you resource, which is a capacity thing. So you have to manage capacity. So how does that all work? We made everybody track their time, like consultants. They had to go into a time tracker and actually track their time. We had to manage the process, manage the people. We had to evolve them. And then our measures were basically speed and quality. From a scope perspective, we had to evolve into services. So how do you scope a service? How do you create deliverables? We had to redefine a lot of our outputs and clarify if we made video or not. We're trying to elevate the learning experience and also elevate our knowledge management templates and what was in there, the role of knowledge management versus the role of classroom training. All this stuff is what we had to figure out. And then also we had to adopt more of an agile approach, so testing and deploying and learning as we go. Instead of going straight to final and getting it to everybody and all 30,000 people, we had to learn how to pilot and prototype and get it to folks. Number 9 is we had to shift our operating model. So while we actually did a reorg, it was at the end of the process. We had to put an operating model in, which basically means how do you learn how to do this stuff, which is a work together thing. For 2 years we worked together and then we reorged. So we didn't do a reorg to force everybody together. We learned these practices and principles in the existing org chart, learned these disciplines and processes and skills, and then we reorged and it made it more natural. The engagement model, we had one core business process that built everything, but it would tailor based on how we needed to engage. So it's like a 8-lane superhighway. We had the super fast lane that would do stuff the same day. We had the super transformational lane, which would do 12 months total redesign of all new hire training for a business unit. Take 12 months to do it. And there are different swim engagements engagement models in between. a staffing model, who does what. So we had to track the skills, what they were good at, and then analytics. And this is where we finally started seeing the business ROI piece, which was we decreased new hire ramp by 20%. We added $12 million in revenue. We launched a new line of business in 5 months, things like that. So we have the business impact there. So that allows us to evolve and elevate. So just quickly, and then we'll do, and if you guys have questions online, you can ask them, and then we'll do a bit of a Q&A here. What I did in the next piece of this is, how did these phases roll out? So the basics was we set up for speed and quality. We had to build and deliver, and we prioritize, resource, manage, and measure. On the manage piece, that meant we had to manage our people and our process and our technology. That's what that was. That was the big thing. And so that also meant we had to manage expectations. This is where this whole stakeholder management thing that Scott and I have been on has really been important. And it was a lot of work, and I didn't do it as well as I could have. Hundreds of people in a matrix within a matrix, you're talking hundreds of people. We actually would have leadership meetings where we would plot out the hundreds of people, and when was the last time we'd go in our own CRM that we had. We had a CRM for our own function, and we had all our touch points in there, and who's touching who and talking to who, and notes were in there, our engagement model was running through there, and approvals were in there. So I could go to John Smith in Business Unit 5 and look at all of the things we've asked John Smith to do over the last quarter. I could actually do that, which most people were shocked we could even do that, because previously it was all by email, and you had no traceability. So we actually, in the whole business of the business, we did things like, we need a CRM for ourselves. We need a pipeline management tool for intake. We centralized intake. We need project management software. These are heavy investments, so don't get me wrong. We spent a lot of money, but we built a proper business within the business staffing model, et cetera. We literally could have spun the whole thing off and went to market separately. It was its own business. Crazy. Then from next evolution, it's in the second piece, it's about running programs. And that, when you optimize there and you try to drive consistency, the challenge in an enablement function is we're knowledge workers. So you want the creativity, you want the problem solving, you want the ability to go out and tackle root cause. We're not just robots. And more importantly, these are complex problems that salespeople have. You can't just wave your magic wand and fix them. So the challenge here is this idea of speed versus quality. And the faster you are, the more crappy it is for sales, because it just pushes it all to salespeople, who then push it all to customers. So in this enablement business within a business, we said we've got to do more work on behalf of sales. So that meant our timelines would increase. That meant that the business was getting mad. It'd take us longer to build stuff. So we'd have to explain all the variables. This is like 101 stuff, but a lot of people it's a black box. I asked for it, and it spits it out. It's magic. It's like a vending machine. I go to the vending machine, I put money in, I hit the button for curriculum, and it spits out the bottom, and boom, curriculum's here. But it's a knowledge working process. So we actually went on a road show to explain how people build stuff today. That there's actually humans that actually put fingers on keyboards, and those humans need input. This was like, we thought we were going to install everybody's intelligence, but this was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't know that's how it all worked. You guys are making this too complicated. Okay, what would you change? What would you take out? Can't really take anything out. They just don't know. So that meant we had to get really good at defining requirements. We actually built our own playbook. So this is our playbook for our team, was a requirements playbook where we took all of our processes and distilled them into basically 9 key requirements to do our work. And we figured out that 67% of what we needed came from other groups. And we could say, we're responsible for these, you're responsible for those, here's what we need from you by when to this spec in order for us to do our work. That was fun, because we were a black box before, and people would just be like, I don't know, whenever we get to it, and then we'd miss our timeline. So we actually drew a critical path diagram, and we started backwards, and we plotted everything out, and we said, back over here, for every day you miss this deadline, then the whatever, the article, the curriculum, the launch, would slip a day. Yeah, but there's 3 weeks. This is our build process. We've socialized it to you. We've told you for a year and a half, this is what we need. You're clear on what we need. Yeah, but we don't have it. That's fine. We're just going to move the launch date. We're not going to be ready. You can launch without us, but the reps won't be trained. This is now business. These are some business conversations. So when enablement's like, hey, we don't have what we need for a launch, now they're like, oh. Before it was, yeah, just go get it done. What did it mean before? Everybody's working nights and weekends, canceling vacations, missing their kids' soccer games because there's a deadline. So there is a knowledge work assembly line that has a bunch of people interdependent on each other that has to be understood. That's the requirements for you. So I probably went too deep on that. Sorry, I geek out a little bit. The last piece was moving to advisor, being a business unit. That means we had to transform for business impact. What that meant was, like, first, for example, are sales managers a strategic role or a tactical role? Discuss.
Strategic.
But you get, some say it's strategic, some say it's tactical, some say it's both. Okay, what about new hire training? Is that strategic or tactical? Same thing. It's tactical. It should be strategic. It's important. No, it's not. And not everybody agrees. So this is the strategic side of sales enablement, where these things are becoming, if you're really enabling go-to-market, and you really understand the time we're in, and you really understand the chasm that exists between your company and your customers, then these things are strategic and tactical, and that's where sales enablement, it's in the gap. Trillions of dollars being spent on strategy, trillions of dollars in execution, nothing in the middle, that's called sales enablement. And by the way, 80% of the problem is in that space, not in strategy and tactical, I need to send an email execution platform. It's in the middle. And so that meant, and I shared a little bit about this already, the operating model, though, it's like, what's your infrastructure? What's your services you're providing? What's your analytics measurement piece? How do you build an experience? What's your technology portfolio that you're running? These are components of an operating model that we had to evolve. And that meant then that we could drive ROI. So, that's a lot. But I would just say as we transition off that I want to frame out, and Scott and I worked on this because there's a lot of confusion in sales enablement, and I wanted to end with this. We're really talking about in this whole thing, sales productivity. And we're talking about execution. Productivity, and I didn't know this, they didn't teach me this coming out. I have a PhD and I have basically an MBA, it's an MSA, but nobody taught me this stuff. And what is productivity? Efficiency and effectiveness equals productivity. And it's important to understand there's two different components of productivity. The efficiency piece is how fast you do things. The effectiveness piece is how well you do them. And you need both to be highly productive. You need to do it fast, as good as possible. So on the efficiency side, when you apply that to sales operations, by nature, should be about efficiency. Now, there's been a lot of scope creep and trends, and everybody's taken on more, but in reality, it should exist to drive efficiency, which, should be things like the sales technology platform, sales process, the sizing of the team, reporting on the team, even sales compensation. That's about the efficiency of the sales team. Headcount, how many reps per manager, things like that. That's over there on the efficiency side. What I talked about today was the effectiveness side. Guess who's over there? Anybody want to guess who that box is that I'm about to reveal? Anyone? Bueller? Sales enablement.
I've heard of them.
So sales enablement is about effectiveness, which means effectiveness of what? It should be the sales conversation. How well are we communicating through a conversation? That's what selling is. You take the conversation away, you do it online. So there is transactional sales without a conversation. There are chat bots that mimic a conversation, and AI is doing, conversing on a chat bot, but it's not a real human-to-human contextual conversation yet. The conversation element is what enablement should be focused on, and that's who do we have? How do we get them leads? What's they going to say? What are they going to say? The magic phrase. Great, we're going to sell that platform, and we just did a whole new business strategy, and we wave our magic wand, and we're supposed to be selling to CIOs. What are reps going to say when they get in the office? Crickets, right? That's what happens. And then sales administration.
Now, are you including managers in that talent box? Because when you say who they are and you look at the other things following that, you automatically just think the rest, the ones that will, where's your manager box?
They are under all of that. I actually view them as a component of sales enablement. And if I had another box, it would be sales execution of these things. But you embed them in. You should be thinking about the talent of managers, and managers have a dual hat. So sales managers have general management stuff that everybody else has, sexual harassment training, things like that. They have to do that. 15% of their job. But then they're also, the primary job is to enable the sales team, make sure it's productive and executing the sales strategy. So they're in the enablement bucket as an enabler through their relationship with their rep.
Right. Or
And
they should be.
They should be.
Yeah, because we keep talking about, and you said a good bit about it in the first part of your presentation, silo busting is one of the biggest things that we do in our work today, which it is for me, for sure. Where you're just called in the realm of the problems we're having in a sales enablement, department, is that no one's talking to anybody. It's not talking to marketing, it's not talking to sales is not talking to marketing, and it's this, we're too siloed to get the customer what the customer needs when they need it. And as you said earlier, a lot of times that's boiling down to the manager, up to the manager level, because if they're not bought in, the people are not going to be bought in.
Yeah.
And I never see, we all say it's a problem or a big problem or one of the biggest problems we're having.
The manager piece?
Where does it fit in? Yeah.
Yeah, so the manager, yeah, absolutely. The sales managers have to drive sales productivity, right? They have to drive sales, they execute the sales strategy, that's their job.
Yeah.
The challenge is that there's two sides to that problem. One is they've largely given up on having help. And if you go read the management literature and the management books, it's go it alone, you don't need anybody, control what you can control, focus on activity, you're not going to get any help, just do it, which I think that's not good.
Yeah.
The second side of it is look at what they're getting. In the siloed story, we're on the 4th floor, product marketing's on the 5th floor. There's so much inertia coming at managers, they have no ability, because everybody goes direct. And everybody assumes that they know what their people need. These are their people. Who's asked managers? They just say, oh, here's your training, here's this, and they're like, how would you like it if you had a team and somebody walks up to you and says, here, I've done all this for your team and your people need to do this? Nobody's going to like that, but that's been their life for 50 years. But if you look at the history of sales managers in the early 1900s, they owned the business. They were responsible for growing it. Those were their customers. Now, who owns customer? Marketing apparently does, because they've declared it. And we own the customers.
Everybody does.
Yeah, everybody does.
Yeah.
So what then you get into is what's the role of sales management?
Yeah, I think we got to put that, where it belongs.
Yeah, I would have a third box called sales execution, and it would be get the number through your people by driving client value, things like that. And I would have the domains of sales management, which are things like, obviously, coaching, but opportunity management, forecasting, building out your talent, your culture in your team, getting the outcomes of your team. That's under sales execution.
And maybe it's just as simple as saying sales enablement, a big umbrella, in some way is in charge of cross-collaboration. They're in charge of making sure that each department is that every department is talking to every department. Every function and role is communicating. That there is no silos. That this has become a standard within sales enablement. We cannot have silos. I know we're a long way from that, but.
Yeah, I think that the sales enablement team can't go and say everybody should talk to each other, because I think they're going to actually say we do. I think it would be, hey, we own the sales conversation. That's us in sales enablement.
Mm-hmm.
You guys in marketing, demand gen, anybody that wants to impact the sales conversation has to go through us. We own the sales conversation enablement. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, our credibility comes from those we serve, which is our sales managers and VPs who are backing us up. Mm-hmm. So back off. That is the value-added service of enablement, not as because what you just said to a CEO could be seen as like an overlay function to get everybody to play nice, and they don't want to pay for that. But if you say, listen, we have all this stuff, product is around product, Messaging, marketing is around brand. Who's around sales conversation? That's us, sales enablement. So that's what we do. And yes, we have to get people to talk. Yes, we have to have cross-functional.
Yes.
But it's so much muscle memory around product that there has to be a function that stops the insanity. And that's why Scott and I are with our podcast and also things like this, we're trying to give people the confidence and the clarity to stand tall and not just become part of the problem. All right, so let me see, we gotta check the chat and then we'll be done. Oh, there people are dropping. Okay, if you have to drop, that's fine. And
I think my question pretty much.
the last,
You nailed it all.
I will say here's 5 things and I'll just leave you with this. Make a plan, proactively manage your stakeholders, build services, not deliverables, iterate over time, and then it's outside in, not inside out. That's what we're talking about, is there's so much inside out inertia that somebody has to have the conversation in mind and actually know more about the customers than anybody else. We actually invested in an architected view of our buyers, our end users, our buyers, and we created basically not personas because they're not specific enough. We actually created a whole taxonomy of buyers and buyer roles at altitude levels, and we started pumping in. We pumped in trends and all this other stuff into this database of who our customers were that we sold to, our company sold to. And it was like our enablement architects would go there. We would bring it to the line of business, and this is, are you seeing this in sales? Let's define our customer together. And that way our people could talk about customers. But nobody ever believes, and Scott is the same thing. I'm going to just stop saying it because nobody believes in this. People don't know, companies don't know their customer. They say they do. And the last story I have is from 2002 until today. So 17 years I've been on the quest to find one rep in the world, because I've done this on 22 different countries. And I go talk. I say, who here wants to come up on stage? I've got $100 US for the rep who can actually come up on stage and talk about their customer. And then I get all kinds of hands. I pick somebody and I say, the only caveat is you can't talk about your company, your product, or yourself for 2 minutes. And I'm not the judge. The audience is the judge. So you guys are all going to be the judge. And they come up. First they freeze because they're looking at 150 people or 200 people. But then they ask a bunch of questions as salespeople do, and I won't answer them. It's because I just answer, talk about your customer for 2 minutes. I don't know how to do that. Okay, give me the mic back. That's what usually, and then, or they say, boy, this is really hard.
And they just can't talk, they can't say their company's name.
About themselves, their company, or their solution / product / anything they sell.
It shouldn't be that hard.
No.
Go back to your office and pick somebody.
No, not the customer person, the customer company.
Well, it's the customer person.
Oh, the person's okay?
Actually, that's the key.
They have crazy picnics every week.
No, actually, yeah. So you're on the right track. The people who start going are the ones who click it into. I'm selling. I'll just pick somebody. I'm selling to ABC Inc. and there's this person named Sally. Let me tell you about Sally.
No.
But even in that view, the longest somebody went was under a minute to talk about Sally.
I can turn that into an talking. Just saying.
You can.
Anybody's interested.
Well, let me know what happens. Yeah, I would word it slightly differently. I would say that the company has wired them to be that way. That salespeople have no choice.
The inside out.
Because the entire, like for example, I've audited new hire training. You guys are outside in, you talk about your customers. This is new hire. What's the purpose of new hire? To help salespeople be successful. What do they got to do? They got to sell. They got to talk to customers. Give me all your content. I'm going to audit it and see how much you're talking about your customers. In most new hire training, it's less than 2% of the content's about customers. So welcome to our company. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about us. Oh, by the way, you haven't sold anything. What's going on? Because talk about us again. Let me give you coaching about us. Let me tell you about our products. Let me tell you how we're organized. Let me tell you about we found it in a garage. It was a really cool garage. The year was 1975. And you're like, so now go sell. How come you haven't sold anything? The flip of it is, welcome to company X. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. In the new hire program, we've signed up for your success. By the time you leave here, we will not release you until you get your first sale. And we're going to track your time to second sale. So we're gonna help you sell your first deal. That's our new hire program. Well, how long does it last? Until you get your first sale. What if it takes 6 months? Then you're gonna be with us for 6 months. Because we're gonna drive an outcome. That freaks everybody out. But that's the flip side of it is, welcome to new hire. I'm gonna help you get a conversation going. I'm gonna help you get access, not just shooting on people. You should go get access, by the way. You should be talking to somebody else. You should be doing this with a company. You should be selling more. You should be whatever. And they've never been taught that. So most of the new hires is inside out around product. Most of the coaching is overly prescriptive. Doesn't help anybody think on their feet. Most managers are, go do this. And the whole machine is wired inside out.
Well,
Thank you for joining.